Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the dotBANK webinar, a primer for dotBANK. Our presenters today will be Craig Schwartz, FTLD Registry Managing Director, managing dotBANK and dot.insurance domain registries. He is also a former Chief Registry Liaison with ICANN. We will also have John McElwain, partner of Nelson Mullins Riley in Scarborough. They focus on intellectual property litigation and strategy. John McElwain was voted one of the best lawyers in America from 2013 throughout 2015. He is also Vice Chair of Internet Committee for the International Trademark Association. And finally, we have Thomas Barrett, President of Encirca. Encirca is the first dotBANK accredited registrar founded in 2001. The sole registrar serving on FTLD's Security Requirements Working Group. They are also a trademark agent for the Trademark Clearinghouse. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Tom Barrett for introduction of new GTLDs.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you everyone for attending today. dotBANK has launched as of Sunday night, so it's a very exciting time for them. There's already several hundred registrations that have come in from trademark owners. This dotBANK is part of an expansion of the internet that started just over a year ago, and there's now about 600 new extensions that have come out to join .com, .edu, .org. All of these have special right protection mechanisms for trademark owners, one of which is a sunrise period that we'll talk more about in a second. As I say, that sunrise period runs for 30 days and has already begun. All of these sunrise orders, as well as general availability orders, must come through ICANN accredited registrars, and dotBANK currently has about 18 who are supporting them. If you, I can tell you the ones who are not supporting them, that includes GoDaddy, Network Solutions, and Register.com. Encirca is obviously proud to be one of those 18, and we're happy to be talking about it today. The registry operator for dotBANK also has rights for dot.insurance, which will be launching in the fall of 2015. Next slide. So how is dotBANK different from those 600 other top-level domains that have come out this year? And a fair number of those, about a dozen, are related to the finance industry. They include .credit card, .mortgage, .cash. And the big difference between dotBANK and those others is that dotBANK is being managed and operated by the banking community. Craig will talk more about this in a second, but it is really the only finance-related top-level domain that is really being run by the banking community. And their goal is to make sure that dotBANK becomes the online internet address for trusted and secure online banking. And so they have very strict eligibility criteria in terms of who can get a dotBANK domain name, and they have strict criteria about the names they can apply for. They must correspond to the bank's existing names, and that includes acronyms and abbreviations. And also there are very strict security requirements that must be applied to how the dotBANK domain name is being used. So here, that's a quick introduction. I'll hand this over to Craig from the dotBANK registry to talk about some of those policies we just mentioned.
Thank you, Tom, and thanks to Encirca for hosting another webinar on dotBANK and dot.insurance. Next slide, please. So as Tom previously mentioned, FTLD Registry is a community-based organization. It is owned, operated, and governed by a group of banks, insurance companies, and financial services trade associations. Our mission or our goal is to serve and protect the sector and the customers that banks and other eligible organizations serve doing business online. We're a fairly new company, founded in 2011. We went through a very lengthy ICANN consideration and application process, and were finally awarded the right to operate dotBANK in September of 2014, and just received in February of this year the right to operate .insurance. We have a number of ways that we involve the global banking industry or the sector in the work that we do, either via our security requirements working group that does spin up from time to time to tackle certain issues that are important to banks. And we also have an advisory council that weighs in on the policies and procedures that are developed for the governance and issuance of .bank domains, as well as .insurance. And as Tom mentioned, .bank launched this last Sunday night. Actually, it technically launched on May 14th in the evening, but that was for a very short period of time for a specific category of registrant. The sunrise period started on Sunday, May 17th, and the general availability period, which is when most banks will come in to register domain names, starts the evening of June 23rd at 8 p.m. East Coast time. We have a couple of key business partners that help us do our operations, including VeriSign, which runs our technical infrastructure, really the backbone of the .bank and .insurance domains. You may be familiar with them, but they also run .com and .net and also .gov. Symantec is the third party that we have engaged with to perform all of our verification services, and we felt that it was important to have an independent third party doing that verification for us rather than to do it in-house. Symantec is one of the world's leading security organizations, and entrusting them to this task we felt was the right decision to make. And then we also have select ICANN registrars that we've approved to be authorized retailers of our domain names, and Encirca is one of those approved vendors. Next slide, please. So we have strict eligibility for .bank, that is, who are the entities that can ultimately register domain names. You can see here on the list, it's primarily regulated banking and savings associations, regulated banking and savings institutions. We also do enable banking associations to participate, as well as groups of banking associations. And an example of that might be the European Banking Federation that has among its members 32 different banking trade associations. We also include industry service providers, a very select list of service providers, and ultimately those entities have to be approved by our board of directors. The primary group that we consider for this category are technology service providers, or what you might know as core processors. We feel that because they play such an integrated role in a bank's online presence, whether it's managing completely their whole website and or specific portions such as their online banking feature or online bill paying feature, that core processors should have a place in .bank. It's not meant generally for security companies and web hosting companies and other types of organizations that provide services to a broad range of industries. This category is very specific to banking sector service providers. We also enable government banking regulators. And before we move to the next slide, a question we frequently get is, can a bank holding company register a domain name in .bank? And so the answer to that is no, they can't, because they are not a provider of banking services. They're generally a company that may own one or more banking institutions as well as a variety of other types of organizations, but they actually don't provide banking services, which is why they're not eligible. What can be done if you're concerned about a bank holding company is either have the bank make the registration because it's eligible, and there are other contact fields where you can include bank holding company information if it's important for them to be part of your registration. You also could consider having the bank holding company make the registration on behalf of the company. However, the underlying contact information for that registration would need to be for the bank itself. That way, Symantec could successfully perform its verification process. Next slide, please. So as part of our enhanced requirements in dotBANK, we have also a number of enhanced security provisions. Some of these are fulfilled by us as the registry operator. Some are fulfilled by registrars, such as Encirca, and others would be performed by you as the domain name owner, commonly called the registrants. We have, among things, mandatory verification of eligibility before the domain name is awarded to you. And we also do mandatory re-verification every 2 years or upon domain renewal, whichever comes first. We have these several next items: DNSSEC, email authentication, enhanced encryption, multi-factor authentication, that are all intended to enhance consumer trust and confidence in services and products that are provided via dotBANK domain names or via communications coming from dotBANK email addresses. We have a prohibition of proxy and privacy services, which essentially means the registration data associated with your dotBANK domain must be that of the bank and not for some type of third party or some type of proxy service, which is generally intended to hide the true identity of a domain name registrant. And we have this requirement to use dotBANK name servers, which is also another way of enhancing security in the domain name. And I know Tom is going to speak to that a little bit more broadly in his section. Next slide, please. So we have already talked about eligibility requirements, we've talked about enhanced security requirements, and now we're talking about name selection requirements. And depending upon the period in which you choose to register a domain name, whether it's during sunrise, which we're currently in now through June 17, or during general availability, which I mentioned starts at 8 p.m. on June 23rd, East Coast time, there are two different naming selection policies for those respective periods. So during the sunrise process, and I think John is going to speak to this in his section, during sunrise, the domain name that you register must be a match of the record that you've made in ICANN's Trademark Clearinghouse. Probably more relevant for most banks is the general availability period starting again in June, where domain names must correspond to your trademark, trade name, or service mark of the business. It doesn't mean you have to have a registered mark, but it does mean you need to be able to demonstrate that you have a right to have that name as a domain name. You also are not able to register certain names that have been reserved by either FTLD as the registry operator or that are mandated by ICANN as the quasi-regulatory body overseeing the domain name system. And those lists of reserved names are both available on www.register.bank. They're also available on encirca.com, and other registrars probably provide that information. Domain names are limited to alphanumeric characters, so you can only use A through Z, and you can only use 0 through 9, and you can also include hyphens. At this time, all 1 and 2 letter domain names are currently not available in dotBANK. We may make them available at some point, but we are not currently allowing them to be registered. If and when we do decide to release those names, we would make a public communication about it and give everyone an opportunity to participate in securing one of those. As I mentioned a moment ago, with respect to the reference to reserved names, there are several that we as the registry operator have reserved. We call them common community names and generic names. An example of a common community name is American or citizens or farmers, and those names are not currently available. What you can do, if your name is one of those community names, you could add perhaps a geographic identifier. So if you're Farmers Bank of Mississippi, perhaps you want FarmersMS.Bank, or perhaps you want an acronym, FM, Farmers Bank FBS, the Farmers Bank of Mississippi. So there are many ways that you can structure your domain name around the fact that you might have a common community name. We also have a group of generics, again, that are not currently available. If we choose to make them available in the future, again, we would notify you. Next slide, please. So here are some examples of the corresponding rule for domain names, which is applicable to coming in during general availability starting in June, and how you might structure your domain name if, for example, it is a common community, or even if it's just any other name that you might want to make shorter or make more easily recognizable. If you have a very long name now, perhaps you would like to have an acronym of your entire name. And these are guidelines around what you can do to meet the corresponding rule, and this is by no means exhaustive. Next slide. So it looks like my section is done, and I'll turn it over now to John McElwain, who will talk about trademark protection.
Thanks, Craig. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the intersection of trademarks and dotBANK. Trademark protection is important in the domain name system for three reasons. First, it allows a registration in the Trademark Clearinghouse, something we've already heard about. Second, it allows for sunrise registrations, and as also we've heard from Craig, it does have some impact on the verification process. And third, it allows a bank to protect its mark from having others use it as part of a domain name. That's something for another day to cover, though. So what I'm going to cover is the intersection of trademarks with the dotBANK program, which is primarily going to impact the timing of a bank's ability to register its domain name with dotBANK. Go ahead and move to the next slide, please. So this is a sort of a graphic here of the dotBANK launch phases, and let me cover a few of the terminology that you see here on the slide. So TMCH is an abbreviation for the Trademark Clearinghouse. The Trademark Clearinghouse is the entity that is authorized by ICANN to serve as a repository of trademark registration data. It's important to keep in mind that the Trademark Clearinghouse should not be confused with the United States Patent and Trademark Office. The United States Patent and Trademark Office is the entity that you submit an application to hopefully achieve a federal trademark registration. Again, the Trademark Clearinghouse is an independent private entity authorized by ICANN to accept those federally registered trademarks so that you can take advantage of the benefits that it offers. And one of those benefits you'll see here is a early sunrise registration. So sunrise process is an early registration period that is open to holders of trademark registrations that have been recorded with the Trademark Clearinghouse. You'll see here that general availability is the period, or sometimes referred to as the land rush period, in which any person meeting eligibility requirements can register a domain name within dotBANK. As you see here, it's important to keep in mind that all registrations are on a first-come, first-served basis in both the sunrise period and the general availability period. As Craig mentioned, we are already in the sunrise period, which began at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on May 17th. And general availability, the period that will be open to any bank, will begin at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on June 23rd. Next slide, please. So I'm going to cover this very briefly. To be eligible to record a trademark in the Trademark Clearinghouse, the bank must be the holder of a national registration. In almost every case, this means that the bank is going to have a trademark registered with the United States Patent and Trademark Office. If you're not sure whether you have a trademark registered with the USPTO, it is possible to go to www.uspto.gov. If you click on trademarks, then you will be taken to a tab that will allow you to click on search trademarks, and you can enter a search for your bank name or your bank's trademark name to check. So that is something I'd recommend doing. And again, it's not to be confused with the Trademark Clearinghouse. There are a few other ways to get into the Trademark Clearinghouse, but what is important to keep in mind is that the process takes about a week. So if you have a federal trademark and you have not yet recorded it, there still is time to do so and take advantage of the sunrise. However, it is running out, so I would definitely recommend that you do so as soon as possible. And we're going to cover this a little bit in the next slide, but it is important to keep in mind that what does not, a trademark registered in the sunrise process must be an exact match. We can go ahead and move to the next slide, please. So on that point, the question is when to register in the sunrise. If you already have a federal trademark registration and if you want a .bank domain name that is an exact match to your trademark registration. This is not a .bank requirement. This is a requirement of ICANN. So that rule of there being a direct match is something that is being imposed by ICANN. When would you want to register in the general availability period? That would be if you don't have a federal trademark registration, or if you want a .bank domain name that is not an exact match. So keep in mind, again, it's first come, first serve. You can already now sort of pre-screen for a .bank in the general availability. Verification, which Tom will cover, must still be passed. And remember, the corresponding rule does not apply to a sunrise registration. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Andrew.
Thank you, John. I'd like to remind everyone at this point that this webinar has been recorded and it will be added to our website, www.encirca.com/bank. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please enter them into the question box of your GoToWebinar widget. And now regarding registration process and pricing, I turn it over to Tom Barrett from Encirca. Tom?
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, John and Craig. So I'm going to go over the mechanics of the registration process for .bank and give you an idea of how you can maximize your chances of success during that process. So at a high level, the registration process, and this is true today if you're registering any domain name, you go to a registrar like GoDaddy, you put in, say, a .com website, and you get instant feedback on whether or not that name is available. So again, at Encirca, you can do the same thing with a .bank domain name. It will tell you if the name's available. It might not be available if it's reserved or taken during sunrise. But if it is available, then the next step is you put in your payment information. The name gets reserved for you by the registry. And again, the first one to request that name gets to reserve it. So you don't get any priority if you have, for example, the matching.com domain name. Once that name is reserved, then the verification agent that the registry is using, called Symantec, will then start to do a background check on the bank. They will look at to make sure the physical address that we said the bank was at is in fact true. They'll look at the phone number that's provided, and they'll even call the bank to verify that the person who submitted these domain names is in fact an employee of the bank and is authorized to do that. Only after all that is complete is the domain released from a pending status and registered for use by the bank. It's important to note here that you can continue to use your existing website for your bank. When you do activate your .bank domain name, they can be run in parallel. In fact, you can redirect your new .bank domain name to your current website right away. And that gives you time to decide how to do the eventual migration from your existing website to your new .bank domain name. Next slide, please. In terms of what's involved in the verification process, so once we've reserved the name for you so that no one else can grab it, Symantec then goes through this verification process. They do a security check, as I mentioned. They check that you're licensed by the relevant governing authority. They verify that the name you've applied for, that you in fact are eligible either under Sunrise or general availability. And Craig already talked about some of the rules for corresponding domain names. They'll verify your physical address, your phone number, and the person applying. So again, the important points to remember here: the contact who does apply for the name must be a full-time employee of the bank. You certainly can have a third party submit the order, but they must provide the contact details of a full-time employee. The HR department or HR executive must be able to answer a call that Symantec makes to the bank's primary phone number. This process is all going to happen within 2 days or so, and is repeated every 2 years at least by the dotBANK registry. Once you've been verified, then you can activate your domain name. Again, they do not need to be activated right away, but when you do want to activate them, there are some new rules that do not apply to your current website or to .com domain names. The primary new rule is that these new .bank domain names must use .bank name servers. So what that means is that if you currently have a website hosted, say by Network Solutions, which has a .com or .net name server, you cannot use those name servers for your .bank domain names. So for example, if your name is mylocal.bank, we recommend that you simply use that domain name and set up name servers such as ns1.mylocal.bank. And this allows you to be compliant with the .bank security requirements and activate that domain name fairly quickly. So let's talk about how Encirca can help you with the registration and activation. We are currently in a phase where we are compiling a line, basically, for general availability on June 23rd. We also had a corresponding line for the start of Sunrise that happened Sunday night. And the line is important because it's a first-come, first-served allocation. So whoever applies for the name first has first rights to it, assuming they can pass verification. So we're conducting pre-screening for banks now. As part of that pre-screening, we will tell you if you're eligible, if the name you're applying for does in fact correspond to your existing legal name. We'll tell you if the name is reserved or has already been applied for by a trademark owner and has been taken during Sunrise. We'll also tell you if in fact there might be a trademark in a trademark clearinghouse from a bank that could potentially apply during Sunrise. So Sunrise runs for 30 days through June 17th. We also are providing some optional services. One of them is a premium DNS service, which I'll explain in a second, so that you can activate your .bank domain name as soon as it becomes verified. We also have a fallback service. You can apply for multiple names in .bank. We have banks applying for 10, 15, 20 names. But it may be that you have a primary name you want, and you have a secondary name that you would want if and only if your primary is not available or is taken by someone else. And so we do have a fallback service that allows you to specify that option. Next slide. In terms of pricing, our pricing is $999 a year per domain name, and this is competitive if you compare us to some other registrars. Some of the other registrars look like they have lower pricing, but then they tack on some application fees, which we do not. So this is an all-inclusive price. We do not require payment up front. So if you prefer to pay via bank check or ACH, that's fine with us as well, as long as we receive payment before the submission date. So once you submit that order, we will conduct our pre-screening and give you the results of that, and then you can decide whether or not you want to proceed with that order. There are refunds if, in fact, we're not successful in getting your name, or if you do not pass the verification fee. The bank will retain $200 for any banks that don't pass that verification fee. In terms of our optional services, we would like banks to be able to activate their names as soon as possible. As I said earlier, many banks have existing websites and DNS providers that do not support dotBANK, and so we are offering a premium DNS service for this purpose. It is $199 a year. However, we are offering a free 3-month trial for all of our dotBANK customers, which allows them to become compliant with the new security requirements for dotBANK and instantly activate their domain name once it's been verified by the registry. So the free trial is a full-featured trial for our service. It includes vanity name servers using your dotBANK domain name. It includes DNSSEC and DMARC records for the enhanced security requirements, and includes web forwarding to your existing website. You only need to buy this service once, so if you're buying multiple domain names, all of them can use this single service. And in fact, down the line, you can decide to consolidate all your other domain names under this name service as well. As I said, we're offering that on a free trial basis, a 3-month free trial basis for all new dotBANK domain names. And our second service, which I talked about, that fallback service, is a one-time $200 fee, and you can identify a secondary or a third or fourth choice in the event your primary choice is not available. And this is really only relevant for June 23rd, the first day of Land Rush, basically. Because after that fact, we'll be able to tell you as you submit your order if your name's available or not. So what can you do to maximize success? Certainly don't delay. Determine within your company, your bank, which names you're interested in applying for. Determine if you have a registered trademark for any of those names. It is too late to actually register a trademark, say with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, but it is certainly not too late if you have a registered trademark to apply to the Trademark Clearinghouse in time for the end of Sunrise. So we're anticipating Trademark Clearinghouse process takes about 5 days. So with Sunrise ending on June 17th, you have until about June 10th, June 12th to submit something to the Trademark Clearinghouse and get it back in time to apply before the end of Sunrise. As part of our pre-screening process, we will tell you if there are other trademarks in the Trademark Clearinghouse that are owned by banks that might be applying during Sunrise. And most importantly, we will take your names, put them into our submission queue, and automatically submit them for you at 8 p.m. June 23rd to make sure you get the names you want. So that's all we have for you today. I appreciate your time. We do invite any questions you have. We'll answer them right now. If you're interested in starting this screening process, again, payment is not required up front. You can go to encirca.com/bank, and we also can schedule a phone consultation with you. If you send us an email at dotbank@encirca.com, we can schedule that for you. And if you have any trademark questions that we can't answer for you, feel free to contact John at john.mcelwain@nelsonmullins.com. That's it for today. And Andrew, I'll turn it over to you to see if there are any questions that people have.
Thank you, Tom. We have a couple questions. First one being, what would be a scenario in which a desired domain name would be a failed registration?
So let me take that one. This is Craig. So what could cause a failed registration? One could be that the domain name selected is not compliant with the name selection policy. That is, you've requested a domain that is not that doesn't correspond to your trademark, your trade name, or your service mark. Another reason for failed verification could be that Symantec was not able to verify that the person requesting the domain is authorized by the company as a full-time employee of the company. Another reason could be that the entity itself is not eligible. An example of that might be we've seen requests already from mortgage companies, and mortgage companies do not meet the eligibility requirements for dotBANK. So there are a variety of reasons why a registration would fail verification.
Okay, thank you, Craig. And regarding successful registrations, how do you recommend banks that currently have a .com transition over to their .bank domain name?
So that's a question that Tom may be able to help with in the near term. I think it's a much longer discussion than what we can cover on this webinar. You would need to consult with either the person in your IT department that manages your website and or your other IT-related infrastructure. If you're using a core processor to maintain your website and your internet presence, you would need to engage with them. But there are certainly some mechanics that go into having content resolved on a .bank domain versus simply having something redirect to a .bank domain. Tom, did you want to try and weigh in on this one?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said earlier, we will be providing, you can do web forwarding instantly from your .bank domain name to your existing website. But to actually migrate to a .bank domain name, I think requires the participation of all the disciplines in your bank. So it's not just a technical issue, it's also a marketing issue. Because in a sense, you are now branding yourself online with a .bank domain name. So you need to think through the branding issues associated with that. There may be support issues and legal issues. And so our plan, and I know Craig's involved in this as well, is we're developing a migration guide that will start to deal with not only the technology issues with migration, but some of these marketing and support issues as well. And we plan to start conducting webinars about that, probably starting in July for the banks who are ready to start that thought process.
Awesome, thank you. And I believe this would actually be a great follow-up. Probably would fall under the same answer, the webinars in July. But would Encirca be willing to help set up DNSSEC with the IT department for the bank?
Yeah, in fact, we're doing that now. And so as part of I mentioned we have this premium DNS service. We are offering a free trial for that, and that applies to all of our Sunrise registrations. And so that free trial includes the vanity name servers, the DNSSEC, and the DMARC, as well as the web forwarding. If you wanted to host your own name servers, which may be the question here, we obviously can provide that service as well. So that's certainly a discussion we'd love to have.
Great, thank you. And one final question. This is a two-part question. For both periods, Sunrise period and general availability, how soon would a bank know that they have received a successful registration? after they submit their information.
So this is Tom again. But it really depends on what registrar you're working with. If you're working with Encirca, we will remember there's a two-step process. We first reserve the name, and so that's fairly instantaneous. Second of all, it goes through the verification process, and your bank should be aware that's going on because you'll get a call from Symantec that is expected to take 2 days. And then your registrar, such as Encirca, would let you know, hey, you've passed that process. You've now been granted that domain name. And so expect certainly less than 5 days from start to finish for the whole process.
Great. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, John, and thank you, Craig. Thank you, everyone, for attending our webinar today. That concludes our webinar. Again, if you'd like to initiate your order process and start the pre-screening, please visit encirca.com/bank. If you'd like to consult a free consultation with Encirca, please email us at dotbank@encirca.com. Any trademark questions can be directed towards John McElwain at john.mcelwain@nelsonmullins.com. Thank you again, everyone, and have a great day.